Are you struggling to create an intentional headspace? Unable to connect deeper with yourself? Come, and together, let's address the elephant in the room. I'm your host, Sinead Roche, and this is the Uncomfortable Podcast. Have you ever found yourself saying, why am I here again? How did this situation happen 2 times or 3 times or, 10 times at this point? You literally can remember another past experience where it's like deja vu almost, and it's like you have the same feelings about this situation as you did in the past one, and you're like, what the fuck actually happened? I recently had a realization that I do this often, especially when it comes to the people who I pick to be in my life. And I realized that I pick people who don't choose me. And I realized that I do a lot. I pick people where I kind of have to prove that I'm worth their love, that I'm worth it. And I found myself doing this repetitively. I've done this in romantic relationships. I've done this in friendships. And I'm just like, how do I keep ending up here? And why does this keep happening to me? And literally in my last 2 sessions of therapy, which I'm so grateful that I get to go to, because I get to figure out these things about myself without it just being, me, which is not bad, as long as we have a starting point, that's great. But she was she kept asking me this question. She's been asking this question for a while. I just didn't really pick up on it. She's like, why do you keep picking these people? Why do you keep doing this? Why is this a pattern of yours? And she literally, last time, she's like, you've done it 1, 2, 3, 4. This is your 4th time now doing this. Why do you keep doing this? I was like, what? And that's when she introduced me to this term called repetition compulsion. And this term was coined by Sigmund Freud. I think many people know Sigmund Freud. He's this famous, he created the house of psychoanalysis or psychodynamic. I'm forgetting right now. Psychodynamic or psychoanalysis, field of therapy, basically. And he's known for the Oedipus complex, which is basically that, if you're the daughter, you're attracted to their father, and if you're son, vice versa with the mother. Also looking at daddy issues and mommy issues in that sense. And basically what repetition compulsion is that people are driven to relive past experiences, often without realizing it. And it's not these great and wonderful experiences, but it's trauma, and they do trauma reenactment, and especially with experiences in life such as physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. And this usually happens to people who have not dealt with their trauma yet. And I mean, I would say it's a big ask to do that, but it's also really, really hard to keep going through the same exact experiences in any single capacity, whether that be from the extreme of what trauma can be, even to the minor details of what trauma can be. And one thing I want to preface about this video is that I'm not here to say that to blame the victim, if you're someone who has done this, and after this episode, as you reflect, okay, have I actually been in situations that have necessarily ended up bad for me? Am I putting myself there? I don't mean to say that it's all your faults, especially if you've gone through traumatic situations and that's probably the reason why you keep on reenacting them. I'm not here to say that you're the problem. I guess I'm just here to bring this to your mind, to make you aware of this, the same way I was made aware of this, because at some point, especially if you want better for yourself, you have to go through the hard realizations that certain things have messed with you, and you might really just be continuing to repeat them because you don't know anything different, And I think that's definitely a reason why we practice repetition compulsion, because it's very familiar to us. Why would I want the unknown? And we're also probably not aware that we're doing it. For me, I was not aware that I was doing this until it was literally pointed out to me that like after every single example, and regardless of what the situation is, I keep putting myself in places where I'm fighting for people's attention, fighting for people's love in that sense. And so even just like us not being aware might be another reason as to why we continue to practice the same habits that end up having us, that's the terminology, end up having us in the same spot that we just came from. And I think probably one of the biggest reasons, attached to trauma, like if it's happened to you, and I think especially at a young age, that's what you're seeing, that's what you think is normal. I think you also believe that like you deserve it and that there is nothing better for you, and that you are probably like put onto this world to continue to be punished like this, or like that you just, there can't be better for you. And that is absolutely not fucking true. I'm a bit angry, but like that is absolutely not true. And I think a lot of times, like when you start to appreciate yourself as a person, when you start to really just be intentional with who you are as a person, and to see, what you're made of, and like not just what you do, but like who you are, I think you start to realize like, wow, like I'm amazing. And I don't say that in a way to not be humble or to not be modest, but like I'm actually amazing, and I don't mean to brag about that, but just I am. So no, I actually do deserve better. Like this will not be what I have my entire life like towards. Like my life can't be like this, And for me personally, like I've realized I don't just do this like going back to the first example of like, picking people who don't choose me. I also realize I choose people like who are afraid of commitment or just don't want to be committed. And I think like I'm the exception somehow, so I can prove it to them. I can, and I don't know, like I just keep going through those cycles in different ways, and it becomes so exhausting. But to some degree, it's like familiar to me. And so you just continue to repeat the cycle. And I think really is until you become aware of yourself that you do start to work on this. So now let's talk about how can we, make ourselves aware about this and get through this. First of all, you're here at this episode. So be proud of yourself for that. Even if you're just here because it interests you, like the topic, or maybe like you're just a friend of mine or you're my mother, I appreciate that, but you're here, and with that comes different reflection questions that you could be, looking back at and being like, okay, is there something in my life where I see myself doing it multiple times or ending up in certain situations multiple times, and I could be fixing them somehow because they keep leading me to like these negative or like low places in my life. That could be something that helps you to become more aware of it. But other things, like, honestly, is finding help. Sometimes it's about finding help and going to a counselor and being open to that. And I definitely want to make another video of like, ending that stigma, knowing that it's not a bad thing, to need help or to seek it. And another thing to like really, I guess not push you in that direction, but please understand that when you're dealing with your own traumatic experiences, you have your perspective and your perspective alone. The more times that like other people kind of introduce how they perceive you to yourself and they kind of show you some patterns that you have, I think then you become aware of like different like experiences that other people have had that you haven't had, that kind of make it seem like the experiences that you've gone through are not normal, and I think it's nice in that sense, like when we are around people and when we also go to therapy, like it's someone who is seeing you and seeing other things that you have faced. And, for you, it might have been really normal, but they can also show you in a way that like, this is actually not beneficial for you. This is actually harming you, and I think that is probably the biggest way that the biggest thing that's going to help you to overcome like repeating these actions or repeating these habits and these patterns again, which is going to seek help. I think another thing that you can do on your own is personally like naming the trauma that you have, and maybe even like doing your own research and looking how to avoid like future reenactments, or understanding what emotions are attached like when you get into these patterns and behaviors. And the reason why I say that like naming the trauma is important when we talk about like, you know, of like trauma reenactment is because then you can pinpoint it. Then you know exactly like what type of situations like would lead to you ending up in those same places, in the same positions. And then lastly, like I think when you go through these processes, and because I'm still going through these processes, I as well, like I have a really hard time, like I had a really hard time coming to terms with this. I still do, because especially like emotionally, like I'm really just like, I really just want to, but I really want to continue to do all these things with these people, like, but it's just too much. You just need to let go. Like it's not helping. Another thing that I think would also help is then understanding how to change your behavior, because sometimes, especially when it comes to trying to make yourself believe that you deserve better, you can't. Changing those thoughts and changing that mentality is very, very hard. But changing the actions, I wouldn't say it's also easy, but I would say that, you know, you practice, and after you practice for a while, it becomes routine, becomes habit, and it's kind of this thing of like, okay, what would, quote unquote, like, what would the higher self of me do? And in that sense, as, you know, you change the behavior, then you might start to actually believe what you're doing is actually better for you and right for you. And the way that I've seen myself do this is that because I usually place myself in places where I have to prove my love to people, and that I'm not prove my love to people, but prove that I'm worth it to people, I realized that I've shied away a lot from the people who just naturally like me. That sounds messed up, but like I do. I naturally like just shy away. Like if I've met people who they're so nice to me, and I'm just like, what the fuck are you doing? Like I haven't shown you what I'm worth, or like you know, I haven't earned it yet. And I realized this, like, especially like when a friend of mine, she told me, she's like, Sinead, people actually want to be around you. You do know this. Like, people actually want to get to know you. And for me, I was shocked. And I think also like a bit uncomfortable. And I've also realized this, like with the people who then want to get to know me, like I stray away a bit because I'm like, nah, this is not like what I'm used to. But recently what I've been trying to do is I've been trying to make plans with people who I know I don't have to prove myself to. And that is not me lowering my standard of people who I want to be around. That is me like welcoming people who want to love me, like without me having to earn it. And people who have the open capacity and availability for me to also be in that space with them. So that is a behavior change that I am currently focusing on, rather than constantly focusing on like, okay, how can I get this person to commit to me? You know, what else do I need to do? Like, how understandable do I need to be in that sense? You know, and slowly, like in some instances, like I do even find myself, like I come back from like even hanging out with those people who I wouldn't have normally hung out with, and I'm just like, I love this. I feel happy. I feel lighter. And so I wouldn't say that I had have broken necessarily my pattern yet, because I definitely need to understand more about like the trauma, dig deeper into it, which is why I'm also in therapy. But I would say I'm at a good starting point. Say it to you like that. Which I definitely have not been in the past 2 years. So I'm very proud of myself for that. Anyways, coming to the end of this episode, let's get into some reflection questions that will hopefully make you guys think whether or not you've been in some of these situations as well. And if you haven't, good for you. If you've seen someone who you love and care about, like who's constantly, like putting themselves, end up finding themselves in these kind of situations, then maybe send them this episode. But with that said, some of the questions that I would want you to ask yourself is, first of all, have there been some situations where you feel like you've experienced this before, where it's just like, how is this happening to me again? What's wrong, Ask yourself then, what part do I play in this as well? Because the older we get, one thing I've realized is it might not have been our fault for what has happened to us, but it is our responsibility. And I think it is our responsibility how we react towards it. And I think we owe it to ourselves to do better for ourselves and to want the best for ourselves and to create an environment and create a space where we can actually, exist like that and be happy and be free and be able to grow and all of these things. But yes, also ask yourselves, that was a hard question then, what part do I play in this as well? And lastly, I would really encourage you guys to ask yourselves, do you have access to a counselor, to a therapist? I think anyone who's in uni, you should have a counselor available. And yes, it might not necessarily be the number one best, maybe you don't end up with a good one, but maybe taking the steps, and trying out different therapists, or seeking online groups in that type of sense. That could also be another way that you could also help yourself further along. But obviously then there's also this podcast as your starting point. And again, I'm really happy that you have found it. And I hope that you share it as well. Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode. Hey guys, thank you so much for supporting this week's episode of the Uncomfortable Podcast. Make sure to tune in every Monday for a new episode on Spotify and YouTube, and go check out our TikTok and Instagram for more content.